In the wrong hands, position and influence can be a very dangerous thing. Take Harvey Weinstein, accused of using his power to abuse and manipulate others. And he is not the only one. What will it take to stop all of this? You're watching Roundtable with me, David Foster. An inequality of power so great the victims are silenced, their abusers go unpunished. The Harvey Weinstein scandal has brought many stories of systemic abuse to the fore, and there are those who say it could now be a tipping point in Hollywood and elsewhere. Abuse that comes from the top. Powerful people who use their positions to control and exploit. In politics, business, and Hollywood. Harvey Weinstein, one of the movie industry's most powerful men, is accused of decades of abuse against women. A scandal that has highlighted the impunity that can apply to very powerful people.
This isn't a Hollywood problem. This exists in all kinds of other arenas, as we all know and we've all seen.
I think what we want to do is empower women to speak out about what's going on and let them know that they're not alone and that this stuff is behavior that should not be acceptable.
A man is responsible for what he does, and the industry is saying that that is the case now.
Weinstein's alleged behavior was buried in a system that turned a blind eye. But for how much longer? Will the allegations against him be a catalyst for change in the film industry and beyond? Harvey Weinstein was an important man to know. A Miramax film could propel an actor to stardom. In public, he was a powerful member of Hollywood royalty. Privately, it's claimed, he was a master of manipulation. Hollywood actresses Angelina Jolie, Gwyneth Paltrow, and Lupita Nyong'o join more than 50 women who have broken their silence with their claims, accusing him of sexual harassment, sexual assault, even rape. Weinstein has denied the allegations. In Hollywood, women were warned they were not safe around him. Yet confidentiality clauses, multi-million-dollar contracts, and fear kept the many claims against Weinstein out of the public eye. The exploitation of power isn't always about male abusers and female victims. It exists in many industries and parts of society.
This kind of behavior cannot be tolerated anywhere, whether it's in entertainment, politics. You know, after all, we have someone admitting to being a sexual assaulter in the Oval Office. There has to be a recognition that we must stand against this kind of action that is so sexist and misogynistic.
Power abusers are often enabled by their industries and their workplaces. Is the first step in stopping this behavior simply acknowledging it exists and giving power to victims to speak out instead of staying silent? Well, with me at the roundtable today, the foreign affairs journalist Rossalyn Warren. Welcome to her, the academic and author of Women Vs Feminism, Why We All Need Liberating from the Gender Wars. That's Joanna Williams. Also with us, Heather Brunskell-Evans, an academic at King's College London and the co-founder of the feminist organisation FiLia. Thank you very much indeed, all of you, for coming in on this subject. Heather, let me ask you first of all, because you've made a study not going back just to the beginning of the Weinstein affair, but to human behavioural patterns for a lot longer than this. Are we talking here about sex or power or both?
I think we're talking about both and their interaction with one another. If by asking, do I think it's attributable to sex, I don't know whether you mean the biological sex of persons. I certainly don't think that men are programmed to be predatory. But I do think that when sex gets caught up with our culture, there is a way in which there is a structural sense that men can achieve power through predating on women.
Is this come to light simply because women have said enough is enough, or simply because, or maybe it isn't simple at all, because we are in changing times?
I think we're definitely in changing times, but my real concern about this, just going back to the previous question you asked, is that we're actually blurring an awful lot of things together. So the accusations against Weinstein are very, very serious, and it's precisely because they're so serious that they really need to be tried in a court of law. And the problem is when we try them in the court of social media rather than in a court of law, try them even in mainstream media, we risk jeopardising any potential trial.
Absolutely, and it is something we're going to get into, I hope, in a little bit more detail later on in the programme. Rossalyn, your view on this is what? It's been around for a long time, women are speaking out, or what?
I think, you know, as the previous clip just detailed, systematic abuse and abuse of power exists in all industries and in all situations. I think certainly this was a tipping point. I'm still sceptical about how much of a tipping point it will be. I like to think that women perhaps will feel more comfortable in being able to confide or speak out against experiences they've been subjected to, but I still think we have a very long way to go for any sort of real turning tide, as it were.
Let me throw this out, and any one of you can pick it up. New York Times, just 10 days ago. Yes, this, by a woman. Yes, this is a witch hunt. I'm a witch and I'm hunting you. Etc., naming people. I know you hate gossip and rumour bills, but unfortunately they are the only recourse we have.
Well, that's clearly not true. We do have recourse within courts of law as well. People can go to police with allegations. Rape trials do take place. And the idea that the only recourse you have is to take to social media to denounce people is just not true.
But you could also understand why that
Sorry.
You can also understand why a lot of people who do not have trust or faith in the systems currently in place to really listen to victims and to actually believe them as well. I think there's been so much to counter that where, you know, I'm not saying like absolutely it needs to be a social media a witch hunt, but I can understand why some people feel that what is in place today is not enough to support victims.
But I think that's a very naive position that you've just taken, and it's illustrative of the way in which we haven't understood the seriousness of this problem. There have been courts of law for many years, and this behaviour has been going on for many years, and women have tried, with this particular individual, in fact, to seek redress through the law, and it hasn't functioned because he has been much more powerful than the victims who brought a claim against him. So we know that victims have had gagging orders and so on. The idea that the law is neutral and that women can seek justice through the law that isn't the reality of what happens. Now, we should address that too. There are many aspects that we should address. But the idea that women are being a little bit feeble about this, and if only they'd told somebody or gone to some authority, including the law, to explain this, is clearly not borne out by the reality of their experiences and the amount of power that he exercised in order to gag them.
I disagree. I think a world where men can lose their jobs and lose their livelihoods just because a woman says this happened on this particular day is not a world that's good for men or for women. I think serious crimes need to be tried in courts of law.
Sure they do.
And that's really important for bringing about justice. But I think actually it's very bad for women.
Your point is that even if there are courts of law and even if some men, predators, are found guilty, it's too tough to believe in that system totally.
Yeah. I think justice is clearly important for men, but it's clearly important for women, and justice hasn't been applied to women. Women have been subject to this through Weinstein and many other men, employers and so on and so forth for many years, and they have lost jobs if they've complained. So you have to take these things into account. This isn't a witch hunt to bring all men down. This isn't a formula for talking about your own personal experience, putting it into the public domain and making a man lose his job. This may be some of the collateral damage for this. But what this is doing is bringing attention to a structural, systemic inequality for which women have not had redress.
I think women using social media or the media, it's not a witch hunt. You know, the New York Times, heavy, very detailed, very fact-checked report detailing a systematic abuse over time. That wasn't just them throwing out accusations. That was real research that they've been digging into for a very long time. So sort of the idea that the media are just sort of hounding men that they don't like is I don't think, a reality. And for women to be using social media to express themselves or in their own forum, in spaces that they feel comfortable because they haven't had the experiences before where they have been believed or so forth, I don't think that's a negative thing as such.
What about this? You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Take Lindsay Lohan, for example. She said, I feel very sorry for Harvey Weinstein right now. She didn't condone what he'd done. And there are writers going out there, one in the magazine you contributed to, Spiked Online, who say her career's finished because she didn't say Harvey Weinstein's a monster, because she didn't say he's assaulted me. It's the reverse.
Yeah, certainly. And this is why I actually think this is very, very damaging for women as much as it's damaging for men, because women are expected now to present themselves as victims. And it's very hard to present yourself as strong and powerful if you also have to say at the same time, I'm a victim. And I think what we get is broader and broader definitions of sexual harassment, where we move away from specific allegations towards this general culture where women are always considered to be weak and vulnerable, and I don't think that does women any favours whatsoever.
Absolutely not the case that these women are victims. They've come forward, and it's an incredibly difficult and brave thing to do, to actually speak out and talk about sexual harassment and issues like that. They're survivors. Nobody is painting them as victims, and if somebody is painting them as a victim, that's how they are seeing it themselves. Ultimately, this is a case of women being survivors, and really, actually, it's an incredibly difficult and brave thing to do.
Can I just say something? I want to ask you personally, you don't have to answer this one, but have each one of you, or has each one of you, been a victim of harassment in the workplace and or sexual abuse in the workplace? I would like you to separate the two.
Well, I'm happy to go first answering that question. I think I could look back on various experiences that I've had in my life, and if I chose to interpret them through a prism of sexual harassment, I've certainly heard jokes, been touched, been in situations which you could, if you wanted to, describe as sexual harassment, but I do not spend my time racking my past experiences, dredging up memories, and I choose not to define anything that's happened to me as sexual harassment. I could if I wanted to. I choose not to.
If you want to, you don't have to. But I mean, is that a bad point of view or a good?
I mean, subjected to harassment, certainly, and I actually can't think of a single woman that I know that hasn't been subjected to some level of harassment, whether not necessarily always in a workplace, but to some degree. And the idea that women are weak because they've been subjected to something like that against their will is just absurd to me.
To answer your question, David, I actually haven't, not in the workplace, but I don't know any woman who hasn't been subject to sexual harassment or some form of sexual abuse at some point in their lives. It's quite common. What's shocking to me is that people find this shocking, because women have known this for years. I have had other forms of what I would call discrimination in the workplace, where men's ideas are given more weight than mine, I've had less chance to speak than men, and so on. But I don't separate those things. I think those things are all part of a continuum. And I don't think that women speaking out is to make them victims. I think this is finally women finding a voice. This is not about victimhood. This is actually about empowerment. And as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing empowering about, say, I as an individual don't choose to define myself in that way. This is a structural problem. Women have to come out as a group, as it were, and complain about this. And only at that point will anything change. Otherwise, all we'll be doing forever after is saying, well, I've had that experience, but I'm not going to choose to define myself in that way.
Can I just say to you, this isn't just about women. It is largely about women. But I was sexually abused at school 45, 50 years ago. I've decided to do nothing about it because I wasn't going to change my life. But I didn't want it to define my life either. And I feel more empowered by saying, put that away, just leave it there, than perhaps I would have done by saying doing something about it.
Do you mind if I respond to that? I absolutely understand that. And I think that many people do that in order to survive, to feel empowered, to not constantly rub at that sore, which would disable you in some way from just getting on with your life. But The point is that whilst you or anyone else might choose to put it in the past, the point is that I expect, I'm going to make a guess here, that it wasn't a woman who sexually abused you, that it was a man. And that what we need to recognise, that although we're all exercising power all the time, women and men, over each other, the way that with sexual abuse, it is largely men who do it. That is the reality of it. Statistically, it is. So until you speak out, or anybody in this table around this table speaks out, or other people speak out, it will continue. It will be silenced. So there are many boys after you who will have been sexually abused at school. So we have to make a decision. Are we going to attempt to stop this and prevent it and actually have a normative change in society? Or are we going to allow things to just continue as usual and found our own particular empowerment?
So the greater good rather than the personal good?
The greater good, absolutely, absolutely.
But I think one real problem that we face nowadays is that sexual harassment is being defined in ever broader terms. So there's a survey out today which says that more than 50% of women have experienced sexual harassment in the workplace, which sounds truly alarming. But you drill down into those statistics and a quarter of them are jokes, women who have overheard or been on the receiving end of jokes. Now, do we really want to create a world where we ban jokes in the workplace, where we say that hearing a joke is sexual harassment? Because I think if we define sexual harassment as overhearing jokes, then
which you might find offensive, etc.,
yeah,
etc.
I'm surprised it's only 50%. I'm surprised it's not 100%. But who wants to live in a world that's so puritanical we can't have jokes with each other?
I want to come back to this idea of the Me Too campaign. And for those who are not aware of it out there, it's simply putting a hashtag on Twitter, Me Too. In other words, you've been the subject of harassment, abuse, or whatever over a period of time. And thousands, hundreds of thousands of women have done this. And you say it is not a competition as to who suffers the most. But we have no idea whether these people are all telling the truth for a start.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. But, you know, it's if your platform and your individual, whatever it is you're using on social media, women choosing to share an experience is not, you know, everyone that I saw on my social media feeds were like, you know what, I've actually never told anyone about this, but or I've had this experience where I've tried to go to somebody and nothing happened, but or I, along with all these other women, I can understand what you've gone through and this and the other. I think what I meant by it's not a competition is because the idea that women being sort of grabbed in the street, and of course there is a hierarchy. Child abuse is extremely serious, and rape is extremely serious, and there are lesser serious crimes in terms of harassment. Absolutely, but what I mean is you can't just start saying women aren't allowed to talk on social media about being grabbed in the street because it's not rape. You know, it's not a competition of like you can only speak out if it's really, really serious. It's actually.
But it could be the joke that we've just heard about here. I mean, it could be trivial in some people's eyes, but not in yours.
Absolutely, it depends on the individual. It depends on what people, you know, again, what people experience as what is serious in their life compared to others is always going to be different. But yeah, that sort of competition aspect is quite.
But it's a very peculiar model of feminism, I think, nowadays that demands women present themselves as victims. I don't see anything strong and empowering. I mean, if a man hassled me, you know, the idea that you can retaliate to that you can stand up for yourself, but the idea that instead we all rush off to social media to say me too. To me, the me too message is about saying me too, I'm a victim as well. I want included in this victim narrative. And I just think that's really unhelpful. Of course, I'm not saying people shouldn't be allowed to do that. People can post what they like on social media.
Before we get around to arguing about how best to change cultures, systems, let me ask you about a step on from Me Too. We were going to have as a guest Naomi Watts. She couldn't make it for whatever reasons, but she says she backs what's called Name Your Assailant Day, in which those people who believe they've been attacked all go to the police station to make their complaints together. And this is the interesting point. She says, even if there is no successful prosecution, at least your complaint will be on file. What sort of world is that?
Well, if it's still in the police system and they've shown what they've tried to do what they can to hold someone account to crimes that they've allegedly committed, then, I mean, you know, I thought we were just talking about the need to go to police and the need to, you know, spaces where they can talk to.
But she would get gratification from the fact that they'd spoken to the police, whether it was proven or not proven at the end of the day. That's not justice, is it?
David, what kind of world is it that whereby women have had to be silent about these things? You know, we're seriously going to fall into a dichotomy here, where the Me Too campaign is presented as either disempowering women, presenting women as victims, or a wholly good phenomenon, a wholly good issue. Of course, it's social media. There are going to be people who join in with this, who find it traumatizing that a joke was made and so on. I think we're losing time here on this program in reducing it to that level, because it isn't about that level. If somebody finds a joke offensive, it really isn't the end of the world. This is about a very, very big problem, and it's about a very big problem between men and women, and I totally agree with you. The world would be a much better place for men as well as women if we change this world.
Which brings us round to the point I was trying to get at, where we conclude, and can it be changed? If so, how do you change it, and how long is it going to take? Because it's not just Hollywood, is it?
Of course not.
I think making spaces available for men exactly to be included in a conversation is vital. This isn't just about women speaking on their own, on behalf of other women, and this is including men into the discussion to be like, have you ever witnessed somebody else, have you ever witnessed harassment, or have you ever been subjected to some level of this as well? And
have you perpetrated it, actually?
Have you perpetrated
so
it,
men need to reflect upon themselves.
Indeed, I think it's inclusion and ensuring that there is a space where women feel comfortable, yes, but also men can be part of that conversation.
Yeah.
I think the world has changed enormously in a very short space of time. If you go back more than a quarter of a century, you would see a male-dominated workplace. You would see that higher education was male-dominated, that men had all the top jobs. And I actually think over the period of the past 20 years, women have entered the workforce in far greater numbers than ever before. And they're not just doing little part-time jobs to fit in around children. Women are taking more of the top jobs. And I think that's what brings about the cultural
change. Has it brought about a change?
Well, I think it has already brought about considerable change, and I think it will carry on bringing about more and more change.
Well, perhaps
I think we forget what the world was like for working women 30, 40 years ago, and when we talk about sexual harassment in the workplace today, it's nothing compared to what things were like 30, 40 years ago. We don't take account of the distance that women have come.
Are you agreeing, or are you saying you want to say something?
I'm partially agreeing. I think it's fabulous that there have been major changes that have happened, and that's great, and let's celebrate that. But behind all of that, the dark shadow behind all of that, is that many things have not changed. And the reason why things change, the ones that you're applauding, is because women have spoken out and fought for change.
Or because there are decent men around as well who say that what is happening is wrong.
Of course there are. Of course there are. But on the whole, women have had to fight for the vote, for changes to the law, and so on and so forth. And there are men who support that. Absolutely. But to say that things have changed doesn't mean that now we have a perfect world in which women are quite capable as individuals of saying, this has happened, this is dreadful, and going to the law in order to defend themselves. It simply doesn't work like that.
I mean, I certainly don't think we have a perfect world nowadays, and there are lots of changes I would like to see in the world. But I think the problem nowadays is that the only message young women, children, girls at school hear is that everything is going to be terrible for you when you grow up, that you're going to be sexually harassed.
And there are surveys that show that children of a certain age, school children of a certain age, believe that they are likely to be victims.
And I think it's the fear of sexual harassment is now holding women back far more than the reality of it.
Let me put this to you, Rossalyn, because you travel quite a lot with your work. Are there particular areas where you feel you're more likely to face harassment? What does it say about that society? And are there places where you feel more protected, and should we model ourselves on there?
Certainly, I mean, there are some countries where I've reported from, for example, El Salvador, where I felt potentially there is higher crime rates. There are statistics behind the government that suggest there is higher crime rates, there are higher cases of abuse against women or whatever it is. But also that is not to take away from, I think each country has their own issues, and I don't think that that the UK is exempt from the fact that there are very high rates of domestic violence in this country that I've reported a lot on. And, you know, abuse exists in all corners of societies everywhere to a different scale, certainly. And, you know, if me being in a conflict area, absolutely, as a woman working alone, I am prone to more risks, certainly. But also, I just, you know, a woman at home in the UK who has been subjected to domestic violence, that is her own personal level of risk and a different type of violence that someone can be subjected to. So I just, it's not, again, that sort of idea of is competition as such. Some countries, yes, potentially more dangerous than others and higher levels of something or other.
But generally a good thing that we're having this conversation, do you?
Of course, yeah. Always good to be talking about these things. But I do think there is a real problem nowadays when we present women as kind of fragile and vulnerable, and it's completely in contrast to reality.
I'm going to have to say enough is enough. I'm sure we'll carry on this conversation elsewhere. Thank you very much indeed. So there you have it, a case for the prosecution, a case for the defence. That is what happens in a court of law, and then generally you are judged by your peers whether you are guilty or not guilty. That, to some extent, is part of the problem that we're seeing at the moment. It's also part of the solution, that we are simply talking about it, getting it out there. That's what Roundtable is all about, and we thank you for your company. From me, David Foster, from my guest here and the whole team. Bye-bye for now. See you later.